What would you give a stranger who has nothing to offer in return? Martha Cole learned the answer on a night when lightning split the Wyoming sky and two desperate souls appeared at her barn door. She was starving, alone, and 1 week from losing everything. He was dust-covered, silent, and holding a feverish child. She had every reason to turn them away. Instead, she opened the door and unknowingly invited in the man who owned half the county. Stay with me until the very end of this story. Hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this tale travels across the world. The storm came without warning, the way disasters often do in Wyoming territory. Silent on the horizon one moment, then roaring across the plains like a living thing made of wind and rage. Martha Cole stood at her kitchen window, watching the sky turn the color of a fresh bruise, purple-black and swollen with violence. The glass rattled in its frame. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled like artillery fire. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, though it did nothing against the cold that had settled into her bones. The cold wasn't from the storm. It was from hunger, from exhaustion, from the kind of loneliness that eats you from the inside out. 3 years. 3 years since Thomas had died, his body broken beneath a horse that had spooked at nothing, at everything. 3 years since she'd become a widow at 24, left with a homestead that was more burden than blessing. 160 acres of stubborn Wyoming earth that fought her every single day. The cabin around her told the story of those years in a language of decay. The door hung crooked on leather hinges that should have been replaced 2 seasons ago. The window frames had gaps wide enough to slide a knife through. When the wind blew hard, and it always blew hard out here, dust filtered in and settled on everything like a fine layer of defeat. The floor was swept clean, but the boards were warped and splitting. The furniture, what little remained, was scarred and listing. She'd sold almost everything. The good dishes? Gone. Thomas's tools? Gone. The rifle that had been his father's? Gone. The small silver locket her mother had given her on her wedding day? Gone. All of it traded for flour, for salt, for seeds that hadn't grown, for 1 more month of survival. Now there was almost nothing left to sell, and in 7 days the bank would come. Martha turned from the window and looked at her table. On it sat the last of her coffee, maybe 3 days' worth if she was careful, a quarter loaf of bread, hard as a rock, 2 withered potatoes. That was it. That was everything standing between her and complete destitution. She should eat something, she knew. Her hands trembled when she lifted things now, and her reflection in the cracked mirror above the wash basin showed a face that was all sharp angles and hollow spaces. But eating meant the food would be gone sooner, and she couldn't shake the irrational hope that if she just held on a little longer, something might change. The thunder crashed again, closer now, and the first drops of rain hit the roof like gravel being thrown. Within seconds, it became a deluge. Water poured from the Wyoming sky with the kind of fury that could turn dry creek beds into roaring rivers in minutes. Martha moved to the door and opened it a crack, checking the barn where her last 2 chickens huddled. The structure looked solid enough, though the roof needed patching. Everything needed patching. She was about to close the door when she saw them. 2 figures, emerging from the wall of rain like ghosts materializing from mist. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, moving with the careful gait of someone who'd been walking too long. And beside him, a smaller shape, a child, pressed close against the man's side. Martha's heart kicked against her ribs. Strangers, out here, miles from the nearest town, in a storm that could kill you if you weren't careful. The man spotted her light. She saw him pause, saw him bend down to say something to the child, and then they changed direction, heading straight for her cabin. Every instinct Martha had learned in 3 years of living alone screamed at her to close the door, to bolt it, to blow out the lamp and pretend she wasn't home. Wyoming was full of drifters, men running from something or toward something, men who saw a woman alone as an opportunity rather than a person. She'd heard the stories. Every woman out here had heard the stories, but she didn't close the door. Maybe it was because she could see the way the man walked, not with the swagger of someone looking for trouble, but with the heavy, plodding steps of pure exhaustion. Maybe it was because of the child, who looked so small against the massive Wyoming darkness. Or maybe it was because Martha Cole had become so hollowed out by loneliness that even danger seemed preferable to another night of silence. The man reached her porch, 3 rough-hewn planks that Thomas had never finished, and stopped. Water poured off his hat in streams. His coat was soaked through, and the child beside him was shaking so hard Martha could see it from 10 feet away. "Ma'am," his voice was rough, scraped raw by wind and dust. "I know how this looks. I know you got no reason to trust a stranger, but my boy—" He put his hand on the child's shoulder. "He's sick, fever. We've been walking since dawn, and there's nowhere else." Lightning flashed, throwing their faces into sharp relief. The man had a weathered face, the kind carved by sun and hardship into something that could have been 30 or 50. Dark eyes, careful and guarded. A jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble. But it was the child who made Martha's breath catch. The boy couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, with huge eyes and a pale, fever-bright face. He was trying so hard not to cry, his jaw clenched tight, but his whole body shook with cold and illness. "Please," the man said, and that single word cost him something. Martha could hear it. "Just the barn, just for tonight. We'll be gone at first light, I swear it. You'll never know we were here." Martha looked at them, really looked. The man's coat was good quality under all the dust and rain, or it had been once. His boots were worn but well made. The child's clothes were too thin for this weather, but they'd been carefully mended. These weren't bandits or drifters. These were people who'd had something once and lost it, just like her. "The barn's got gaps in the roof," she heard herself say. "You'll freeze out there." The man's shoulders sagged slightly, as if he'd been expecting rejection and was preparing to accept it. "We'll manage, ma'am. We just need—" "I wasn't finished," Martha interrupted. She stepped back from the door, opening it wider. "The barn's got gaps, and that boy's already sick. You'll both catch pneumonia, and then what good will you be to him?" The man stared at her, and for a moment she saw something flicker across his face. Surprise, suspicion, hope, all 3 at once. "Come inside," Martha said. "Both of you." "Ma'am, we couldn't—" "You can, and you will." Her voice came out sharper than she intended, but she was committed now, and second-guessing herself would only make it worse. "That child needs to get warm and dry. Now move before I change my mind." The man hesitated one more second, then nodded. "Noah," he said softly to the boy. "Come on, son." They stepped inside, bringing the smell of rain and horses and road dust with them. Water puddled on Martha's clean-swept floor. The man took off his hat, and she saw that his dark hair was plastered to his head, silver threads running through it at the temples. "My name's Ethan," he said. "Ethan Hale. This is my son, Noah." "Martha Cole." She closed the door against the storm and immediately felt the cabin shrink. It had been just her for so long that having 2 other people in the small space felt overwhelming, like the walls were pressing in. "You can put your coats by the fire. There's not much heat, but it's better than nothing." Ethan shrugged out of his coat and helped Noah with his. The boy's shirt underneath was damp with sweat and rain, and when Martha got close enough, she could feel the heat radiating off him like a stove. "How long has he had the fever?" she asked. 3 days. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Started as a cough, then this." Martha put her hand on Noah's forehead and had to resist the urge to pull back. The child was burning up. "Sit him down," she said, nodding toward her single chair near the fire. "I'll get water." She moved to the bucket by the door, rainwater she'd collected earlier when the storm first started, and soaked one of her last clean rags. When she turned back, Ethan had settled Noah into the chair and was kneeling beside him, murmuring something too low for Martha to hear. "Here." She handed the cloth to Ethan. "For his forehead. It'll help bring the fever down." Ethan took it with a nod and pressed it gently against Noah's temple. The boy whimpered but didn't pull away. Martha stepped back, suddenly unsure what to do with herself in her own home. These strangers had filled up all the space, used up all the air. She busied herself with the fire, adding the last of her kindling even though she'd been trying to conserve it. "I'm grateful," Ethan said after a long silence. "More than I can say. I know you didn't have to do this." "No," Martha agreed. "I didn't." He looked up at her, and she saw him really take her in for the first time. The gauntness of her face, the threadbare shawl, the cabin that was barely holding itself together. Understanding crossed his features, and something else. Shame, maybe, that he'd brought his trouble to someone who clearly had more than enough of her own. "If you want us to leave—" "I don't!" The words came out before Martha could think them through. "You're here now. The boy's sick. Nobody's going anywhere in this storm." As if to punctuate her point, thunder cracked so loud the whole cabin shook. Noah flinched, and Ethan put a steadying hand on his shoulder. "It's all right," he murmured. "Just noise. Can't hurt you." Martha watched them, father and son, and felt something twist in her chest. She'd wanted children, once, had imagined a cabin full of noise and chaos, the good kind. But 3 years of marriage to Thomas had produced nothing but hope and disappointment, and then he was gone, and that dream had died with him. "Have you eaten?" she asked suddenly. Ethan shook his head. "Not since morning, but we don't need—" "I'm not offering a feast," Martha cut him off. "I've got bread and coffee. It's not much, but it's what there is." She didn't wait for him to argue. She moved to the table and cut the hard bread into 3 pieces, trying not to think about the fact that this was the last of it, that tomorrow there would be even less. She put water on to boil for coffee, using more grounds than she should have because the boy needed warmth, and the man looked like he hadn't slept in a week. When she turned back, Ethan was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I mean it. Thank you." Martha just nodded and set the bread on the table. "It's not charity," she said, more to herself than to him. "It's just what you do. Out here, you help people when you can, because someday you might be the one who needs it." The words hung in the air between them, true and terrible. They ate in near silence, the only sounds the crackling fire and the rain hammering the roof. Noah managed a few bites before his eyes started to droop. Ethan noticed immediately and scooped the boy into his arms with the kind of easy strength that spoke of doing it 1,000 times before. "Where can I put him down?" he asked. Martha looked around her cabin. 1 bed, pushed against the far wall. 1 chair, 1 table. That was it. That was everything. "The bed," she said. "Put him there." "Ma'am, I can't take your—" "You're not taking anything. I'm offering." She met his eyes, daring him to argue. "The boy's sick. He needs to sleep somewhere dry and warm. That's the only option." Ethan studied her for a long moment, then nodded. He carried Noah to the bed and laid him down gently, pulling the thin quilt up to the boy's chin. Martha watched as he brushed the hair back from Noah's forehead, his touch impossibly tender for hands that looked like they'd seen hard labor. "I'll sleep by the fire," Ethan said when he straightened. "If you have an extra blanket, that'd be appreciated, but if not—" "I have one." Martha went to the small trunk at the foot of the bed, the last piece of furniture she hadn't sold, and pulled out a wool blanket that had been her grandmother's. It was worn thin in places, but it was clean and it was warm. She handed it to Ethan, and their fingers brushed for just a second. His hands were rough with calluses, but warm, alive. "Thank you," he said again, and Martha was starting to lose count of how many times he'd said it. "Stop thanking me," she replied, sharper than she meant to. "You'd do the same for someone else." "I'd like to think so." Ethan settled onto the floor by the fire, spreading the blanket over his legs. "But I've seen enough of people to know that kindness like this is rarer than it should be." Martha didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. She busied herself with cleaning up the remnants of their meager meal, very aware of Ethan's presence in a way that made her uncomfortable. It had been so long since she'd shared space with another adult, so long since she'd heard a voice that wasn't her own. The storm raged on outside, wind howling like something alive and angry. Inside the cabin, the fire burned low, casting long shadows across the walls. Martha finally settled into her chair, wrapping her shawl around herself, knowing she wouldn't sleep tonight. She never slept well anymore. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan's voice came from the darkness near the fire. "Depends on what it is." "This place. You're out here alone?" Martha stiffened. "My husband died 3 years ago. The land's mine now." "I'm sorry." And he sounded like he meant it, not the casual sorry people usually offered. "That's a hell of a thing trying to work a homestead alone." "I manage." "I can see that." There was a pause. "But it's hard." "I can see that too." Martha didn't respond. What was there to say? "Yes, it's hard. Yes, I'm failing. Yes, In 1 week, the bank will come and take everything, and I'll have nothing left but the clothes on my back and a lifetime of regrets. I could help, Ethan said quietly. Tomorrow, before we go. I'm good with repairs. I could fix that door, patch the roof. No! The word came out too fast, too sharp. Martha forced herself to soften it. Thank you, but no. I'm fine. I don't need help. It was a lie, and they both knew it. But Martha had so little pride left that she had to protect what remained. All right, Ethan said, and he didn't push. Martha was grateful for that. Silence fell again, broken only by the storm and Noah's feverish breathing from the bed. Martha closed her eyes and tried not to think about tomorrow, about the day after, about next week when the bank came. Tried not to think about how empty the cabin would feel when these strangers left and she was alone again. She must have dozed off at some point because she jerked awake to the sound of Noah crying out. The fire had burned down to embers and pale gray light filtered through the gaps in the walls. Almost dawn. Ethan was already at the bedside, his hand on Noah's forehead. Shh, son, it's all right, just a bad dream. But when Martha came closer, she could see it wasn't just a dream. The boy's fever had spiked higher. His skin was flushed dark red, and he was shaking despite the blankets piled on top of him. We need to cool him down, Martha said, pushing past Ethan. Now, before the fever does damage. She grabbed the water bucket and all her remaining rags, soaking them in the cold rainwater. Help me get his shirt off. Together they worked, stripping Noah down and pressing the cool cloths against his burning skin. The boy whimpered and tried to pull away, but Ethan held him still, murmuring constant reassurances that Martha wasn't sure Noah could even hear. Come on, she whispered, changing out the cloths as fast as they warmed up. Come on, little one. Fight it. Minutes passed. Maybe hours. Time lost all meaning in that gray dawn light, marked only by the rhythm of cool cloth, whispered words, desperate hope. Martha's hands cramped from wringing out rags. Her knees ached from kneeling on the hard floor, but she didn't stop, and slowly, impossibly, the fever began to break. Noah's skin cooled, his breathing evened out. The terrible flush faded to something more normal. He opened his eyes once, looked at Martha with a gaze that was almost clear, and whispered, Thank you, miss, before dropping back into real sleep. Martha sat back on her heels, exhausted. Ethan slumped forward, his forehead nearly touching Noah's, his whole body shaking with relief. You saved him, he said, his voice rough. If we'd been in that barn, if we'd been out in the storm, he's strong, Martha interrupted. He fought it himself. No. Ethan lifted his head and looked at her, and his eyes were bright with unshed tears. You saved him. You opened your door to strangers when you had every reason not to. You gave us your bed, your food, your care. You saved my son's life, Mrs. Cole, and I'll spend the rest of mine trying to find a way to repay that debt. There's no debt, Martha said firmly. People help each other. That's all this was. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. This had been more than just help. This had been a choice, made in a moment of storm and desperation, that had somehow changed everything. The sun was rising now, pale light filtering through the cabin's gaps and cracks. The storm had passed. The world outside would be washed clean, new, full of possibility. And Martha Cole, starving widow on the edge of losing everything, had no idea that the dust-covered stranger sleeping by her fire owned half of Wyoming County. Had no idea that her simple act of compassion had set in motion a chain of events that would transform all their lives. She only knew that for the first time in 3 years, her cabin didn't feel quite so empty. For the first time in 3 years, she didn't feel quite so alone. And for now, as she watched the boy sleep peacefully and his father keep vigil beside him, that was enough. The morning after the storm dawned cold and clear, the kind of Wyoming morning that made you forget how cruel the night before had been. Martha woke in her chair with a crick in her neck and sunlight streaming through the window gaps like accusations. For a moment, she forgot about the strangers in her cabin, forgot about everything except the familiar ache of another day beginning. Then she heard the soft murmur of voices and remembered. Ethan was sitting on the floor beside the bed, talking quietly to Noah. The boy was awake, propped up against Martha's pillow, and though he still looked pale and worn, his eyes were clear. The fever had broken completely. Morning, Ethan said when he noticed Martha stirring. I hope we didn't wake you. You didn't? Martha stood, her joints protesting, and immediately wished she had something to offer for breakfast. The bread was gone. The coffee was gone. There was nothing left but those 2 withered potatoes, and she'd been saving those for, well, she didn't know what she'd been saving them for. A day worse than this one, maybe, though it was hard to imagine how much worse things could get. We'll be out of your way soon, Ethan continued, standing up. I know we said one night, and the boy shouldn't travel yet. The words came out before Martha could stop them, practical and true. He's better, but he's weak. You push him too hard and the fever will come back. Ethan's jaw tightened. I don't want to impose any more than we already have. It's not an imposition. It's common sense. Martha moved to the fire and stirred the dead ashes, looking for any ember that might have survived the night. Give him another day to rest. One more day won't hurt anything. That was a lie, too. One more day meant one more day of mouths to feed, one more day closer to the bank's deadline. But Martha had already saved the child's life. What was the point of that if she sent him back out into the world too soon and he collapsed before they reached wherever they were going? Mrs. Cole. Ethan's voice was quiet, but there was steel underneath it. I appreciate what you did last night more than I can say, but I'm not a fool, and I'm not blind. I can see you've got nothing to spare. We've already eaten your food, used your blankets, taken your bed. I won't take anything more. Then what will you do? Martha turned to face him. Walk until the boy falls down? Hope you find another cabin before dark? Hope whoever lives there is stupid enough to let you in like I was. Something flickered across Ethan's face. That's not what I know what you meant. Martha crossed her arms. But I'm telling you, the boy needs rest. One more day. That's all I'm suggesting. They stared at each other across the small cabin, 2 stubborn people who'd both been bent but not broken by hard living. Finally, Ethan looked away. One more day, he agreed, but I'm going to earn our keep. I'll fix whatever needs fixing around here, and don't argue with me about it. Martha wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she didn't need his help, didn't want his pity. But the truth was, everything needed fixing. The door, the windows, the roof, the porch. Everything was falling apart faster than she could hold it together. Fine, she said, but we need food first. I'll see what I can manage. She took her shawl and the small basket that she used for gathering eggs, though the chickens had barely been laying lately, and stepped outside. The world was transformed. The storm had washed everything clean, leaving the sky a brilliant blue and the air so fresh it almost hurt to breathe. Puddles dotted the yard, reflecting the morning light like scattered coins. Martha walked to the barn, her boots squelching in the mud. The chickens clucked nervously when she entered, still spooked from the storm. She checked their nesting boxes and found 1 egg. 1 single egg for 3 people. She stood there holding it, this fragile thing, and felt something crack inside her chest. 1 egg, 2 potatoes. That was all that stood between them and starvation. And in 6 days, the bank would come, and even this would be gone. No, she whispered to herself. No, you don't get to break down. Not now. Not yet. She tucked the egg carefully into her basket and went back outside. Ethan was on the porch, examining the crooked door with the critical eye of someone who knew what he was looking at. Leather hinges are shot, he said without preamble. You got any tools, even basic ones? Thomas's toolbox is in the barn, bottom shelf, left side. She hesitated. I sold most of the good tools, but there's still some things left. Ethan nodded and headed for the barn without another word. Martha watched him go, this stranger who'd appeared out of the storm and now refused to leave without paying a debt she didn't think existed. Inside, Noah was sitting up in bed, looking around the cabin with quiet curiosity. When he saw Martha, he gave her a small, shy smile. How are you feeling? She asked, setting down her basket. Better, ma'am. Thank you. His voice was soft, polite, the kind of manners that were drilled into a child through repetition and care. I'm sorry we took your bed. Don't be sorry. You needed it. Martha pulled out the egg and the 2 potatoes. Are you hungry? Noah's eyes went wide at the sight of food, and that told Martha everything she needed to know about how long it had been since he'd had a proper meal. Yes, ma'am, he admitted. But Pa says we shouldn't take any more from you. Your Pa's not in charge of my kitchen. Martha set about preparing what she could. She boiled the potatoes and made a thin soup, cracking the egg into it at the last moment to give it some richness. It wasn't much. It wasn't nearly enough. But it was something. She divided it into 3 portions, giving Noah the largest share without making it obvious. The boy ate slowly, carefully, like someone who'd learned not to waste a single bite. When he finished, he looked up at her with those big, serious eyes. "You're very kind," he said. "Are you a widow?" The question was so direct, so guileless, that Martha didn't know how to respond. "Yes," she said finally. "My husband died 3 years ago." "That's sad." Noah thought about this for a moment. "My mama died too, 2 years ago. That's why it's just me and Pa now." Martha felt her throat tighten. "I'm sorry. That must be very hard. Pa says she's watching over us, that she'd want us to keep going, to be strong." Noah picked at a thread on the quilt. "But sometimes I think he says that more for himself than for me." There was a wisdom in those words that no 8-year-old should possess, an understanding of adult grief that came from witnessing it up close. Martha saw herself reflected in this child, saw the same forced strength, the same determination to keep moving because stopping meant falling apart. "Your pa's right, though," she said gently. "You do have to keep going, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." "Is that what you do?" Noah asked. "Keep going even when it's hard?" Martha looked around her shabby cabin, at the gaps in the walls and the warped floor and the empty shelves where food used to be. "I try," she said. "Some days are easier than others." The sound of hammering started outside. Ethan had found the tools and was already at work on something. Martha stood and looked out the window to see him crouched by the porch, examining the weak boards. "Your pa doesn't give up easy, does he?" she said. Noah shook his head, a small smile playing at his lips. "No, ma'am. Once he decides to do something, he does it. That's what Mama used to say. She said he was stubborn as a mule, but it was one of the things she loved about him." Martha watched Ethan work, watched the way he moved with purpose and precision, and felt something uncomfortable shift in her chest. It had been so long since she'd had help with anything, so long since someone had shared the burden of survival, even for a moment. The day unfolded in a strange rhythm. Noah rested in the bed, sometimes sleeping, sometimes watching Martha move around the cabin with quiet attention. Ethan worked outside, the steady sounds of hammering and sawing providing a backdrop to everything. Martha tried to keep herself busy, sweeping floors that didn't need sweeping, organizing shelves that held nothing to organize, but mostly she found herself hyper-aware of every sound, every movement. Around midday, Ethan came inside, his shirt damp with sweat despite the cool air. "Door's fixed," he announced. "Hinges are proper metal now. Found some old ones in the toolbox that just needed cleaning. It'll swing true instead of dragging." "You didn't have to—" "I did, though." He cut her off, but gently. "You saved my son's life. This is the least I can do." He moved to the water bucket and drank deeply, and Martha tried not to notice the way his throat worked, the breadth of his shoulders, the capable strength in every movement. She'd been alone too long. That was the problem. She was starting to see things that weren't there, feel things that had no business being felt. "There's cracks in the window frames," Ethan continued, setting down the ladle. "I can plug those with some mud and straw, keep the wind out better. And that porch is a death trap. A couple of those boards are about to give way completely." "I know." Martha's voice came out sharper than she intended. "I know everything that's wrong with this place. I know it's falling apart. I know I can't keep up with it. You don't have to tell me." Ethan looked at her for a long moment, and she thought she saw understanding in his eyes. "I wasn't criticizing. I was offering to help." "Why?" The word burst out of her before she could stop it. "Why do you care? You don't know me. You'll be gone tomorrow, and you'll never see this place again. So why does it matter to you if my windows leak or my porch collapses?" He was quiet for so long that Martha thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, "Because I know what it's like to try to hold something together all by yourself. And I know how much it means when someone else is willing to help carry the weight, even for a little while." The honesty of it disarmed her completely. Martha sank down into her chair, suddenly exhausted. I'm sorry, she said. I'm not I'm not used to this. To people. To help. I know. Ethan pulled over a crate and sat down on it, keeping a respectful distance. Can I ask you something? I suppose. The bank notice on your table, the one that says they're coming in 6 days. He paused. You in trouble? Martha's hands clenched in her lap. She should lie. Should tell him it was nothing, that she had it handled. But she was so tired of pretending, so tired of being strong all by herself. I'm going to lose the land, she said flatly. I can't make the payment, can't even come close. So yes, I'm in trouble. About as much trouble as a person can be in. How much do you owe? $200. She laughed, bitter. Might as well be 2,000. I've got nothing left to sell except the land itself, and once the bank takes it, I won't even have that. Ethan was quiet again, his expression unreadable. Finally he said, What if someone paid it for you? Martha's head snapped up. What? The debt. What if someone paid it? No. She stood up so fast the chair scraped against the floor. Absolutely not. I don't take charity, and I don't take handouts, and I especially don't take money from strangers who show up in the middle of the night and think they owe me something because I let them sleep by my fire. It wouldn't be charity, Ethan said calmly. It would be a loan. You could pay it back when the farm starts producing again. The farm isn't going to start producing. It never has and it never will. This land is cursed, or I am, or both. Martha wrapped her arms around herself. I appreciate the offer, but no, I'll figure something out on my own. Like what? The question hung in the air unanswerable, because Martha had no plan. No solution. Nothing but 6 days and a growing sense of doom. From the bed, Noah's small voice broke the tension. Pa, maybe we could— Not now, son, Ethan said, not unkindly, but Noah persisted. I just thought, since Mrs. Cole helped us, maybe— Noah— There was a warning in Ethan's voice now, subtle but clear. The boy fell silent, and Martha wondered what he'd been about to say. The rest of the day passed in uncomfortable silence. Ethan went back to his repairs, attacking them with a fervor that seemed almost angry. Martha tried to stay out of his way, tried not to watch the way he transformed her falling-apart homestead into something that looked almost cared for. By the time the sun started to set, he'd fixed the porch, plugged the window cracks, patched 3 holes in the barn roof, and built a small sheltered area for the chickens. The man worked like someone trying to outrun his own thoughts. Martha made another meager meal, the last of her flour turned into flat cakes cooked on the fire, with nothing to put on them except a prayer that they'd somehow be filling. They ate in near silence, the only sound the crackling fire and the distant cry of a coyote. We'll leave tomorrow, Ethan said as they finished. Early. Noah's strong enough now. Martha nodded, trying to ignore the hollow feeling in her chest. Of course they were leaving. That had always been the plan. One night had turned into 2, but that was it. Tomorrow they'd walk away and she'd be alone again, and everything would go back to the way it was. Except the cabin wouldn't be falling apart quite so badly. Except she'd remember what it felt like to have voices in the empty spaces. Except she'd know, for the rest of her life, that for 2 days she hadn't been completely alone. That night, Martha gave up her bed to Noah again without being asked. Ethan tried to protest, but she silenced him with a look. She settled into her chair, wrapped in her shawl, and watched the fire burn low. She must have dozed because she woke to the sound of voices outside. Low voices, careful and quiet. She stood and moved to the window, peering out into the moonlit yard. Ethan was out there, pacing, and he was talking to someone. No, he was talking to himself, running his hands through his hair in a gesture of frustration. Can't tell her, she heard him mutter. She'll refuse. Too damn proud. But I can't just leave her here to lose everything. Can't do that either. Martha pressed closer to the window, her breath fogging the glass. Think, Ethan. There has to be a way. Has to be something you can do without making it obvious. He stopped pacing and looked back at the cabin. She saved Noah. She gave us everything she had, and she had nothing to give. That means something. That has to mean something. Martha pulled back from the window, her heart pounding. What was he talking about? What couldn't he tell her? She went back to her chair and sat very still, thinking. Ethan Hale was just a drifter, a man down on his luck, traveling with his son, looking for work or a new start, or whatever it was that men looked for when they had nothing left. He wore worn clothes and weathered boots and carried himself like someone who knew hardship. But something didn't fit. The way he talked, educated and careful. The way he moved, with the confidence of someone used to making decisions and having them matter. The quality of his coat under all that dust, the worn but well-made boots, the silver watch chain she'd glimpsed once at his waist. Who was Ethan Hale? She didn't sleep the rest of that night. She sat in her chair and watched the darkness slowly give way to gray dawn and tried not to think about the fact that this was the last morning she'd wake up to the sound of other people breathing in her cabin. When the sun finally rose, Ethan was already moving, packing up their few belongings with quiet efficiency. Noah helped, still moving carefully, still not quite back to full strength, but determined not to show weakness. Martha made the last of the coffee, weak, stretched too thin, barely more than brown water, and divided it 3 ways. "Thank you," Ethan said as she handed him a cup. "For everything. I know I keep saying it, but I mean it every time." "I know you do." Martha wrapped her hands around her own cup, savoring the warmth even if the coffee itself was barely worth drinking. "Where are you headed?" "South," Ethan said vaguely. "There's supposed to be work down that way. Ranch work, maybe." It was a lie. Martha could hear it in his voice, could see it in the way he wouldn't quite meet her eyes. But she didn't call him on it. Everyone was entitled to their secrets. They finished the coffee in silence. Noah came over and gave Martha a sudden, fierce hug. "Thank you for saving me," he whispered. "I won't forget you." "I won't forget you either," Martha said, and meant it. Ethan stood, settling his hat on his head. He looked around the cabin one more time, his gaze lingering on the fixed door, the plugged windows, all the small repairs he'd made. "If you need anything," he started, then stopped. "I'll be fine," Martha interrupted. She had to be the one to say it, had to hold on to that much pride at least. "I've managed this long. I'll keep managing." Another lie. They both knew it. But Ethan nodded and turned to go. They were at the door about to step out into the clear morning when something inside Martha broke. Maybe it was the loneliness. Maybe it was the fear. Maybe it was just the simple human need to not be alone with her terror. "Wait," she said. Ethan turned back. Martha struggled with the words. "Thank you. For the repairs, for the help. I know I fought you on it, but I'm grateful." "It was nothing." "It wasn't nothing to me." They looked at each other across the small space of the cabin, and something passed between them. Understanding, maybe. Recognition. The acknowledgement that they were both people who'd been broken by loss and were still trying to figure out how to put themselves back together. Then the moment passed. Ethan nodded once more, took Noah's hand, and walked out into the Wyoming morning. Martha stood in her doorway and watched them go, 2 figures getting smaller and smaller against the vast landscape. She watched until they disappeared over the ridge, until there was nothing left but empty prairie and endless sky. Then she went back inside, closed her newly fixed door, and sat down at her empty table in her empty cabin. 5 days until the bank came. 5 days until she lost everything. She put her head in her hands and, for the first time in 3 years, let herself cry. Outside, the sun climbed higher. The chickens scratched in their newly reinforced coop. The wind blew through the plugged window cracks, barely whistling now instead of screaming. Everything Ethan had fixed held strong and true. And Martha Cole sat alone in the silence and wondered how she was supposed to survive the weight of her own solitude now that she'd remembered what it felt like to not carry it alone. She cried until she had no tears left. Then she stood up, washed her face in cold water, and made herself move. Because that's what you did. You kept going. You survived. Even when every part of you wanted to quit, you took one more step, faced one more day, held on for one more moment. The morning stretched ahead of her, empty and endless. Martha went through the motions, checking for eggs, none, sweeping the floor, again, organizing nothing on empty shelves. Busy work. Anything to keep her hands moving and her mind from dwelling on the inevitable. She was outside, staring at the garden plot she'd never successfully planted, when she heard the horse. Her head snapped up, a single rider coming from the direction of town. Not Ethan. Wrong direction, wrong horse. This was someone else. As the rider got closer, Martha recognized him. Tom Preston, the banker's assistant. A weasel of a man with a thin mustache and eyes that never quite looked at you directly. He pulled up in front of her cabin and dismounted without greeting. "Mrs. Cole," he said, pulling a paper from his saddlebag. "I've got something for you." Martha's stomach dropped. "It's not due yet." "You said 6 more days. This isn't about the payment." Preston thrust the paper at her. "Read it." With shaking hands, Martha unfolded the document. Legal language, dense and confusing. She scanned it once, not understanding, then again more slowly. What is this?" "It means your debt's been paid." Preston sounded annoyed, like this development had personally inconvenienced him. "All of it. $200 paid in full this morning." The world tilted. Martha grabbed the porch railing, the newly reinforced porch railing, to steady herself. "That's not possible. I didn't—" "Who paid it?" "Payment was made anonymously. Bank accepted it because money's money." Preston shoved the paper into her hands. "You're all caught up now. Land's yours free and clear for another year, assuming you can make next year's payment." He remounted his horse, clearly eager to leave. "Oh, and there was this too." He tossed down a small cloth bag. It landed at Martha's feet with the heavy clink of coins. Then he was gone, riding back toward town in a cloud of dust. Martha stood frozen, the paper clutched in her hand, staring at the bag of money. Slowly, she bent down and picked it up, opened it, counted. $50. $50 in silver coins, more money than she'd seen in 3 years. And she knew. In that moment, she knew exactly who had paid her debt. Ethan Hale, the dust-covered drifter who'd shown up in a storm with nothing but a sick child and worn clothes and desperate eyes. Ethan Hale, who'd fixed her cabin with skilled hands and worked like a man who understood hard labor but spoke like someone educated. Ethan Hale, who'd looked at her dying farm and her empty shelves and her stubborn pride, and had somehow known exactly what she needed most. Martha's legs gave out. She sank down onto her reinforced porch and stared at the money in her lap, at the paid-in-full notice, at the proof that Ethan Hale was not at all who he'd pretended to be. Nobody who was truly destitute could pay off someone else's debt. Nobody who was just passing through would leave $50 for a stranger. Nobody who was just a drifter would do any of this. Which meant Ethan Hale had money, probably lots of it, and he'd lied to her. He'd stood in her cabin, eaten her food, slept by her fire, and lied about who he was and what he could afford. The betrayal hit her like a physical blow. He'd made her think they were the same, two people struggling to survive. He'd let her give him her last bread, her last coffee, her only bed. He'd watched her humiliate herself with poverty and had said nothing. And then he'd paid her debt without asking, without permission, making her charity case whether she wanted to be one or not. Martha's hands shook with rage. She wanted to throw the money away, wanted to track Ethan Hale down and fling it in his face, wanted to scream at him for taking away her choice, for making her decisions for her, for pitying her. But she couldn't, because that money meant survival. It meant another year on this land. It meant food and seeds and maybe a chance to turn things around. She hated that, hated needing it, hated him for giving it. But she took the money inside and locked it in Thomas's old toolbox with shaking hands, and she hated herself most of all for being grateful. The anger sustained Martha for 3 days. 3 days of pacing her cabin, rehearsing all the things she'd say to Ethan Hale if she ever saw him again. 3 days of alternating between fury at his deception and shame at her own desperate gratitude. 3 days of clutching that cloth bag of coins and hating how much she needed them. On the 4th day, she rode into town. Martha hadn't been to Redemption Springs in over a month, hadn't been able to afford the trip or stomach the pitying looks from townspeople who'd watched her slow decline. But now she had money in her pocket and questions that needed answers, and pride seemed like a luxury she could no longer afford. The general store was her first stop. She needed flour, coffee, seeds for planting, basic necessities she'd been doing without for far too long. The store owner, Mrs. Chen, looked shocked to see her. "Martha Cole," the woman said, eyebrows rising. "Haven't seen you in an age. Heard you were having some trouble." "Had some trouble," Martha corrected, setting coins on the counter. "It's handled now." She bought carefully, methodically, trying not to think about how good it felt to not have to count every penny twice. When she'd gathered her supplies, she paused at the counter. "Mrs. Chen, can I ask you something?" "Of course, dear." "You know most everyone who comes through town. Ever heard of a man named Ethan Hale?" Mrs. Chen's expression shifted, became careful. "Ethan Hale? Why would you be asking about him?" Something in the woman's tone made Martha's stomach clench. "He stayed at my place a few nights ago, him and his son. Just curious who he was." "You let Ethan Hale stay at your homestead?" Mrs. Chen's voice dropped to a whisper. "And you didn't know who he was?" "Should I have?" Mrs. Chen glanced around the empty store, then leaned across the counter. "Martha, Ethan Hale owns half of Wyoming County. Ranches, mines, timber rights. The man's got more money than sense, according to some. Built an empire out here in the last 15 years. The floor seemed to drop out from under Martha's feet. Half the county, not just wealthy, but powerful. Rich beyond anything she could have imagined. But he looked like... He was dressed like a drifter. He said he was looking for ranch work. Did he now? Mrs. Chen shook her head. That man hasn't worked for wages since before his wife died. Owns the biggest spread south of here, the Hale Ranch. Employs probably 50 men. Why in the world would he be pretending to be down on his luck? Martha's hands gripped the edge of the counter. His son was sick. They needed shelter during the storm. His son. Mrs. Chen's expression softened. Poor little Noah. Lost his mother 2 years back, and Ethan's been like a ghost ever since. Threw himself into work, building and buying and expanding like a man trying to outrun his grief. Half the town thinks he's gone half mad with it. The pieces were starting to fit together, forming a picture that made Martha's chest ache. A wealthy man, drowning in grief, wandering the territory with his son instead of staying in whatever mansion he surely owned. Showing up at her door in the middle of a storm, letting her believe he was someone he wasn't. Did he? Martha swallowed hard. Did he pay my bank debt? Mrs. Chen's eyes widened. I wouldn't know about that, dear. But if Ethan Hale decided to help someone, he'd have the means to do it. That I can tell you for certain. Martha gathered her supplies in numb silence and walked back out into the bright afternoon. The town square bustled with normal life. Wagons rolling past, children playing, the blacksmith's hammer ringing against his anvil. Everything ordinary and untouched while Martha's world tilted on its axis. She should go home. Should take her supplies and ride back to her homestead and try to make sense of all this. But her feet carried her down Main Street to the land office instead, to the dusty building where records were kept and deeds were filed. The clerk looked up from his ledger when she entered. Help you? I need to know about Ethan Hale's holdings, Martha said. What he owns in the county. The clerk's eyebrows rose, but he pulled out a thick book and began flipping pages. Let's see, Hale Ranch, that's 12,000 acres. Then there's the mining interest up in Copper Ridge, the timber rights along the Northern Valley, 3 commercial buildings here in town, shares in the railroad extension. That's enough. Martha's voice came out strangled. 12,000 acres. Her entire homestead was 160. He owned land equivalent to 75 of her farms. Quite an impressive man, Mr. Hale, the clerk continued, oblivious to Martha's distress. Built all that from nothing, they say. Came out here as a young man with barely $1 to his name and just kept working and buying and building. Smart investor, that one. Martha thanked him mechanically and left. The afternoon sun felt too bright, the air too thin. She found herself walking without direction, trying to process what she'd learned. Ethan Hale wasn't just wealthy. He was one of the richest men in the territory. And he'd sat at her table, eaten her scraps of bread, slept on her floor like it was normal. Like he belonged there. Why? Why would a man with 12,000 acres care about one struggling widow on one failing homestead? Why would he fix her door and patch her roof and pay her debts? What did he want from her? The answer came to her as she stood at the edge of town, looking out at the vast prairie. He wanted nothing. That was the problem. He'd done it all out of some sense of obligation, or pity, or guilt, because she'd helped his son, and he'd never asked her permission, never given her a choice. He'd made her a charity case, whether she wanted to be one or not. Martha's anger, which had faded to confusion, roared back to life. She untied her horse, loaded her supplies, and rode back to her homestead with her jaw clenched so tight it ached. She spent the evening planting seeds in her garden plot, driving them into the earth with more force than necessary. The physical labor helped channel her rage into something productive. She planted rows of beans and corn and squash, using Ethan Hale's money to buy hope for a future she'd almost given up on. And hated him for it. Hated that his money made things possible. Hated that she needed it. Hated that somewhere deep down, beneath all the anger and humiliation, she was grateful. A week passed, then two. The seeds sprouted tiny green shoots pushing through the soil like small miracles. Martha tended them obsessively, watering and weeding and willing them to grow. For the first time in 3 years, her garden looked like it might actually produce something. She bought a few more chickens with Ethan's money, fixed the water pump, replaced the worn harness on her horse. Each purchase felt like a small betrayal and a small victory, all at once. She tried not to think about Ethan Hale, tried not to wonder where he was or what he was doing or whether he ever thought about the 2 nights he'd spent in her cabin, tried not to remember the way he'd looked at her with those dark, careful eyes, or the gentleness in his voice when he talked to Noah. She failed, mostly. He haunted her thoughts like a ghost, this man who'd pretended to be something he wasn't and had changed her life without permission. 3 weeks after he'd left, Martha was in her garden when she heard the sound of hoofbeats, multiple horses, coming from the east. She stood, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun, and felt her heart kick against her ribs. 3 riders. The one in front sat tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered and familiar even at a distance. Ethan Hale had come back. Martha's first instinct was to run inside and bolt the door. Her second was to grab something heavy and throw it at him. She did neither. Instead, she stood her ground in her garden, dirt on her hands and fury in her chest, and waited. The riders drew closer. Ethan was flanked by 2 ranch hands, rough-looking men who sat their horses like they'd been born in the saddle. When they were 20 feet away, Ethan held up a hand and the other 2 stopped. He rode forward alone. "Mrs. Cole," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Mr. Hale." Martha's voice was ice. Or should I say, Mr. Owner of half the county. Something flickered across his face. Guilt, maybe, or resignation. He dismounted slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and unthreatening. "You found out," he said. It wasn't a question. "I found out." Martha crossed her arms. "Did you think I wouldn't? Did you think you could just pay off my debt and ride away and I'd never figure out who you really were?" "I hoped you wouldn't." Ethan took off his hat, holding it in both hands. "I knew it was a fool's hope, but I had it anyway." "Why?" The word came out sharper than Martha intended. "Why lie to me? Why pretend to be something you're not?" "Because the moment people know who I am, everything changes." Ethan's jaw tightened. "They see the money, the land, the power. They stop seeing me. And I was tired of it. Tired of being Ethan Hale, the empire builder. I just wanted to be a man with a sick son, looking for shelter in a storm." "So you used me." Martha's voice shook. "You let me feed you my last food, give you my only bed, humiliate myself with my poverty, while you sat there knowing you could buy my entire homestead 100 times over. Do you have any idea how that makes me feel?" "I didn't use you." Ethan stepped forward, and Martha saw real pain in his eyes. "I didn't know how to tell you. Every time I tried, you'd say something about not needing charity or being able to handle things yourself, and I knew if I told you the truth, you'd throw us out. You'd refuse every bit of help, and Noah needed that help. He needed you. So you lied." "So I lied." Ethan didn't look away. "And I'm not going to stand here and tell you I regret it, because I don't. You saved my son's life, Martha. Do you understand that? If we'd been out in that storm, if we'd been in that barn with the leaking roof, Noah might have died. You saved him, and I will never regret doing whatever it took to make sure we could stay." The honesty of it caught Martha off guard. She'd expected excuses, justifications, anything but this raw admission. "And the money?" she demanded. "The debt you paid without asking. What about that?" "I couldn't leave you here to lose everything." Ethan's voice dropped. "Not after what you did for us. Not when I had the means to help." "I didn't ask for your help." I know. He took another step closer. But you needed it anyway. And I know what it's like to be too proud to ask, Martha. I know what it's like to drown while telling everyone you're fine. So I did what I thought was right, and if that makes you hate me, I'll have to live with that. Martha stared at him, this man who'd disrupted her entire life, and felt her anger warring with something else, something softer and more dangerous. I don't hate you, she said finally. I hate what you did. I hate that you took away my choice. I hate feeling like a charity case. You're not a charity case. Ethan's voice was fierce. You're one of the strongest people I've ever met. You survived 3 years alone on this land when most men would have given up after 3 months. You gave strangers everything you had when you had nothing to give. That's not weakness, Martha. That's strength beyond measure. Then why did you have to swoop in and save me? The words came out broken. Why couldn't you just let me handle it myself? Because sometimes being strong means accepting help. Ethan closed the distance between them. Sometimes it means letting someone else carry the weight for a while. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. They stood there in the garden, surrounded by the tiny green shoots that Ethan's money had made possible, and Martha felt something inside her start to crack. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. I don't know how to accept what you did without feeling like I owe you something I can never repay. You don't owe me anything. Ethan reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her dirt-stained hand in his. What you gave Noah, what you gave me, that can't be measured in dollars, Martha. You gave us kindness when the world had been cruel. You gave us safety when we needed it most. If anything, I'm the one in debt. Martha looked down at their joined hands, his rough with calluses that she now understood came from choice rather than necessity, hers stained with soil and work. I planted a garden, she said, not sure why that was what came out. With your money, the seeds are growing. Good. Ethan's thumb brushed across her knuckles. That's good. I bought chickens too, and fixed the pump. The homestead looks better. You've been taking care of it. I'm trying. Martha finally looked up at him. I'm trying to make it work. To prove I can do this. I know you can. Ethan's dark eyes were steady on hers. I knew it the moment I met you. You're a survivor, Martha Cole. You don't need me or anyone else to make this place work. But that doesn't mean you have to do it alone. The crack inside Martha's chest widened. What are you saying? I'm saying I'd like to help. Not by throwing money at problems, but by actually being here, working beside you, if you'll let me. Martha pulled her hand back, suddenly afraid. Why? You have a ranch. You have 12,000 acres and 50 employees and a whole empire to run. Why would you want to spend time on one struggling homestead? Ethan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was raw. Because for 2 nights, sleeping on your floor with my sick son in your bed, I felt more at peace than I have in 2 years. Because you looked at me and saw a man, not a fortune. Because this place, this falling apart cabin with gaps in the walls, it felt more like home than my ranch ever has. The admission hung between them, vulnerable and true. I don't understand, Martha said. Neither do I. Ethan's laugh was hollow. I've spent 2 years building and buying and working myself half to death, trying to outrun my grief, trying to fill the hole my wife's death left. And nothing worked. Nothing helped. Then I walked into your cabin, and for the first time since she died, I felt like maybe I could breathe again. Martha's throat tightened. Ethan! I'm not asking you for anything, he interrupted. I'm not expecting you to fix me or save me or anything like that. I'm just asking if I can come here sometimes. Work on the homestead, help with the heavy labor, be useful in a way that doesn't involve ledgers and business meetings and all the trappings of a life I'm not sure I want anymore. It was the last thing Martha had expected. Not a marriage proposal, not a business arrangement, but simply a request to be allowed to work, to be present, to be something other than what he was everywhere else. What about Noah? She asked. He asks about you every day. Ethan's expression softened. Wants to know if you're all right, if your chickens are laying, if the garden's growing. He's never attached to anyone the way he attached to you in 2 days. Martha remembered the boy's small arms around her, his whispered thank you, his serious eyes that had seen too much grief for someone so young. And your ranch, she pressed. Your business. You can't just walk away from all that. I'm not walking away. I have good men running things. They can handle it without me hovering over every decision. Ethan took a breath. I'm just asking for a chance, Martha. A chance to be someone other than Ethan Hale, cattle baron. A chance to do honest work with my hands and not think about profit margins and expansion. A chance to be around someone who doesn't want anything from me except maybe some help fixing a fence. Martha looked at him, really looked, saw the exhaustion in the lines around his eyes, the grief he carried in the set of his shoulders, the desperate hope he was trying not to show. She should say no, should send him away, protect herself from whatever this was. She'd been alone for 3 years and she'd survived. She didn't need complications, didn't need a wealthy man with his own demons trying to find peace on her land. But she remembered the way he'd worked, the quiet competence of his repairs, remembered the sound of voices in her cabin, the feeling of not being alone, remembered that for 2 days the weight of survival hadn't been quite so heavy. I can't pay you, she said finally. Ethan's face lit up with something like relief. I don't want payment. And I won't be beholden to you. If you work here, it's because you want to, not because you think you owe me something. Agreed. And if I tell you to leave, you leave. No arguments. Yes, ma'am. Martha crossed her arms, trying to look stern, even though something in her chest was unfurling like those green shoots in her garden. Fine. You can come help, but just work, Ethan. No more secret debt payments, no more grand gestures. Just honest labor. Just honest labor, Ethan repeated, and his smile was the first genuine one she'd seen from him. I can do that. He turned to the 2 ranch hands waiting at a respectful distance. Head back to the ranch. Tell Miller I'll be here for a few days. The men nodded and rode off without question, clearly used to following orders. Martha watched them go and felt a flutter of panic. A few days. Ethan Hale was staying for a few days. So, Ethan said, looking around, what needs doing first? Martha almost laughed. Almost. The absurdity of it all. One of the richest men in Wyoming territory asking her, a destitute widow, what chores needed doing. The south fence is down, she heard herself say. Hasn't been right since a tree fell on it last winter, and the chicken coop could use reinforcing. Coyotes have been testing it at night. I'll start with the fence. Ethan rolled up his sleeves. You have wire and posts? In the barn. Thomas's tools are still there too. They walked to the barn together, and Martha was hyper-aware of his presence beside her. He moved differently now, she realized, without the weight of pretense, like he'd been carrying something heavy and had finally set it down. Martha, he said as they reached the barn door. Thank you for giving me this chance. Don't thank me yet. Martha pulled open the door. You haven't seen how much work this place actually needs. I've got some idea. Ethan looked back at the cabin, at the garden, at the prairie stretching endlessly beyond. But I'm not afraid of hard work. Never have been. Then I guess we'll see if you mean that. Ethan gathered the tools and headed for the south pasture, and Martha stood in the barn doorway watching him go. She should feel worried, should feel cautious. Instead, she felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years. She felt hope, and that terrified her more than anything else ever had. The first day Ethan worked on Martha's homestead, he didn't speak unless spoken to. He fixed the south fence with methodical precision, replacing rotted posts and stringing new wire until the line ran straight and true. Martha watched him from the garden, pretending to focus on her weeding while tracking his movements from the corner of her eye. He worked like a man possessed, like he was trying to prove something to himself, or to her, or maybe to the ghost of whoever he used to be. When the sun began to set, he'd completed what should have taken 3 men 2 days to finish. You should eat before you head back, Martha said as he returned the tools to the barn. I'm not heading back tonight. Ethan wiped sweat from his forehead. If it's all right, I'll sleep in the barn. Don't want to impose on your space again. Martha wanted to argue, wanted to tell him the barn was too cold, too rough, but she caught herself. This was what she'd agreed to. Work. Nothing more. She had to maintain those boundaries. There's blankets in the chest, she said, and I'll bring you supper. She made a simple meal of beans and cornbread, far better than what she'd served him that first night because now she had supplies. When she carried it out to the barn, she found Ethan had made himself a neat bed in the loft, away from the animals and the draft. "Thank you," he said, taking the plate. "You didn't have to." "I know I didn't have to." Martha cut him off. "But you worked all day without stopping. The least I can do is feed you." She turned to go, but his voice stopped her at the ladder. "Martha, the fence is done, but I noticed the roof on the chicken coop is sagging. I can reinforce it tomorrow if you want." "All right." She climbed down without looking back, afraid of what she might see in his face or what he might see in hers. The pattern established itself over the next week. Ethan would arrive at dawn and work until dusk, tackling every repair and improvement Martha's homestead needed. He reinforced the chicken coop, then rebuilt the entire structure when he realized it was beyond saving. He dug a new irrigation channel for the garden. He replaced boards in the cabin walls, filled gaps with fresh chinking, and constructed a proper root cellar for storing vegetables. And he did it all with a quiet intensity that Martha found both admirable and unnerving. This wasn't the work of a man doing someone a favor. This was the work of someone building something that mattered. They fell into an easy routine. Martha would make breakfast and they'd eat together at her small table, conversation sparse but comfortable. Then Ethan would work while Martha tended her garden and chickens, and they'd come together again for the midday meal. Supper was the same, and then Ethan would retreat to the barn for the night. It was proper, respectable, exactly what it should be. But Martha found herself listening for his footsteps, watching for his shadow, found herself making extra coffee in the morning because she'd learned he liked it strong, found herself planning meals with more care than she had in 3 years. 10 days into this arrangement, Noah came to visit. Martha heard the wagon before she saw it, and when she came around the side of the cabin, her breath caught. Ethan was lifting his son down from the seat, and the boy's face was lit up with pure joy. "Mrs. Cole!" Noah ran to her with the unrestrained enthusiasm of childhood, throwing his arms around her waist. "I missed you." "I missed you too, sweetheart." Martha hugged him back, surprised by how much she meant it. "How are you feeling? All better?" "All better." Noah pulled back and looked up at her with those serious eyes. "Pa said you have a garden now. Can I see it?" "Of course." She led Noah to the garden plot while Ethan unloaded supplies from the wagon. The boy knelt between the rows, examining each plant with intense concentration. "These are beans," he announced. "And this is corn. And what's this one?" "Squash," Martha said. "If they all grow properly, we'll have vegetables all summer and into fall." "We have a big garden at the ranch," Noah said. "But I like yours better." "Why's that?" "Because you planted it yourself. Pa says you're very strong and brave to run this place all alone." Martha's throat tightened. She glanced over at Ethan, who was watching them with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Your pa's pretty strong and brave too," she said. "He's been working very hard to help fix things around here." "I know." Noah stood and brushed dirt from his knees. "He's happier now. He smiles more. I think it's because of you." The observation was so honest, so guileless, that Martha didn't know how to respond. She was saved by Ethan calling them over. "Brought some things," he said, nodding to the wagon. "Chickens, 6 good layers, some lumber for that shed you mentioned wanting to build, and seeds for a second planting if you're interested." "Ethan," Martha stared at the loaded wagon, "this is too much. It's not charity." His voice was firm. "Consider it payment for letting me work here, for the peace this place gives me. That's worth more than lumber and chickens." Martha wanted to argue, but Noah was already climbing into the wagon to examine the chickens, and the moment passed. She helped Ethan unload while Noah provided running commentary on everything, his chatter filling the air with life and noise. They worked together through the afternoon, building a proper henhouse for the new chickens. Noah helped where he could, fetching tools and holding boards steady while Ethan hammered. Martha found herself laughing at the boy's stories, at his earnest questions about why nails didn't fall out and whether chickens could count. As the sun started to set, Ethan stood and stretched, surveying their work. "We should head back," he said to Noah. "Getting late." "Can't we stay?" Noah's face fell. "Please, Pa. We could sleep in the barn like you do." "Noah, we can't impose—" "It's not an imposition." The words came out before Martha could stop them. "You're both welcome to stay. There's plenty of stew and, well, it's a long ride back in the dark." Ethan looked at her surprised. You're sure? No, Martha thought. I'm not sure at all. But she nodded anyway. They ate supper together at the small table, which suddenly felt too crowded and too full and exactly right all at once. Noah talked enough for all three of them, telling stories about the ranch and the horses and his lessons with the tutor Ethan had hired. I'm learning about history, Noah said proudly. Mr. Patterson says I'm very good at remembering dates. That's wonderful, Martha said. Education is important. Pa says you're educated too. He says you're one of the smartest people he knows. Martha's eyes flew to Ethan, who had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. I might have mentioned that you're well-spoken, he said, and clearly well-read based on the books I saw in your cabin. Thomas liked to read, Martha said quietly. He taught me. Said there was no reason a woman couldn't be as educated as a man if she had the mind for it. He was right. Ethan's voice was soft. From what I can tell, your husband was a good man. He was. Martha stood and began collecting plates. He just didn't live long enough to make all his plans come true. The words hung in the air, weighted with old grief. Noah, sensing the shift in mood, yawned dramatically. I'm very tired, he announced, from all the hard work. You fetched 3 nails and held 1 board, Ethan said, but he was smiling. Come on, son, let's get you settled in the barn. Martha watched them go, father and son, and felt something twist in her chest. This was dangerous. She was letting them into her life, into her space, into the carefully constructed walls she'd built around her heart. She should stop this before it went any further. But when Ethan came back inside after settling Noah, she poured him coffee, and they sat together in the lamplight, talking about small things, the weather, the garden, the new chickens, safe topics that didn't require vulnerability. Thank you, Ethan said finally, for letting us stay, for being so kind to Noah. He paused. He needs this. Needs you, I think. His mother's death hit him hard, and he's been so closed off since then, but with you, he opens up, laughs again. He's a good boy, Martha said. You've raised him well. I've tried, but trying and succeeding aren't always the same thing. Ethan stared into his coffee cup. Some days I feel like I'm failing him, like I should be more, do more, be the father he deserves. You're here, aren't you? You're present, you're trying. That's more than a lot of children get. Is it enough, though? Martha thought about her own childhood, about a father who'd worked himself to death and a mother who'd followed him into the grave within a year, about growing up too fast, learning too young, that life was hard and love was brief. I think children need to know they're loved, she said carefully, need to know they matter. Everything else, the mistakes, the struggles, the times you fall short, they forgive that if they know they're loved. Ethan looked at her with something like wonder. How did you get so wise? I'm not wise. I'm just someone who's made enough mistakes to recognize wisdom when I stumble across it. Martha stood. You should get some rest. Tomorrow's another day of work. Martha, wait. Ethan stood too. Can I ask you something? I suppose. Why did you let us stay? That first night in the storm, you had every reason to turn us away. Why didn't you? Martha considered lying, giving him some easy answer about Christian charity or basic human decency. But something about the late hour and the lamplight and his earnest eyes made her tell the truth. Because I was tired of being alone, she said. Because I'd spent 3 years in this cabin with nothing but my own thoughts for company, and I was starting to forget what it felt like to matter to another person. And then you knocked on my door, and for the first time in forever, someone needed me. Not my land, not my labor, just me. And I couldn't turn that away. The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Ethan took a step closer. You matter, he said quietly, more than you know, more than I probably should say. Martha's heart hammered against her ribs. This was the moment she should step back, should reinforce those boundaries, should remind both of them what this arrangement was and wasn't. Instead, she said, What are we doing, Ethan? I don't know. His voice was rough. I came here thinking I just needed honest work, a break from my life. But every day I'm here, it becomes less about the work and more about... He stopped himself. About what? About you. The words seemed to cost him something. about the way you move through the world with such quiet strength, about the way you tend your garden like it's the most important thing in existence, about the way you looked at Noah with such gentleness, like he mattered just for being himself and not because of who his father is or what we own. Ethan, I know this wasn't the agreement. I know you said just work, nothing more. And if you want me to leave, I'll leave right now. But I need you to know that being here, working beside you, it's woken something up in me that I thought died with my wife. Hope, maybe, or the possibility of it. Martha's hands trembled. She clasped them together, trying to steady herself. I can't be what you need me to be. I'm barely holding my own life together. I don't have room for whatever this is. I'm not asking you to be anything except who you are. Ethan's dark eyes were steady on hers. I'm not asking for promises or commitments. I'm just asking if you feel it too. This thing between us. Because if I'm alone in this, if I'm seeing something that isn't there, tell me now, and I'll respect that. Martha wanted to lie, wanted to tell him he was imagining things, that she felt nothing, that he should go back to his ranch and his empire and leave her alone with her struggling homestead and her comfortable solitude. But she'd done enough lying to herself over the past 3 years. I feel it, she whispered, and it scares me to death. Ethan let out a breath like he'd been holding it for hours. Me too. They stood there in the lamplight, close enough to touch but not touching, both afraid of what would happen if they crossed that final distance. Finally, Martha stepped back. We should both get some sleep. Think clearly in the morning. You're right. But Ethan didn't move. Martha, whatever happens, whatever we decide, thank you for being honest with me. You did ask for honesty. I did, and I'm grateful for it. He left then, walking out into the night toward the barn where Noah slept. Martha stood alone in her cabin and pressed her hands against her chest, trying to calm her racing heart. This was foolish, dangerous. She was a destitute widow, and he was one of the richest men in Wyoming, and there was no world in which this ended well. She should send him away tomorrow, should protect herself before she got hurt. But the cabin felt emptier without him. The silence felt heavier. And Martha realized with creeping dread that it might already be too late to protect herself from anything. The next morning dawned gray and heavy with impending rain. Martha woke early and made breakfast, trying to pretend the previous night's conversation hadn't happened. When Ethan and Noah came in from the barn, she kept her focus on the food, on the ordinary tasks. Looks like weather coming, Ethan observed, glancing at the sky through the window. Probably should head back before it hits, Martha said too quickly. Don't want to get caught in a storm. Ethan's gaze settled on her, knowing. We could stay. Help you prepare for the rain. Make sure everything's secured. I can handle it myself. I know you can. His voice was gentle. But you don't have to. Noah looked between them, confusion clear on his young face. Are you fighting? No, sweetheart, Martha said quickly. We're just talking. It sounds like fighting, Noah said with the brutal honesty of children. You both have your arguing voices on. Despite everything, Martha felt a smile tug at her lips. We're not fighting, I promise. They ate breakfast in stilted silence. Afterwards, Ethan helped Noah into the wagon while Martha stood on her reinforced porch watching. Just before climbing up himself, Ethan turned back to her. I'll come back in a few days, he said, if that's all right with you. Martha should say no, should tell him they needed time apart, space to think. But she found herself nodding instead. All right, she said, in a few days. Ethan's expression softened. We'll figure this out, Martha. Whatever this is, we'll find a way through it. Will we? I hope so. He climbed onto the wagon seat. Because I'm not ready to walk away from this. From you. He drove off before she could respond, and Martha watched them disappear over the ridge with a hollow feeling in her chest. The sky opened up an hour later, rain pouring down in sheets, and she spent the day inside trying not to think about dark eyes and calloused hands and the dangerous warmth that bloomed in her chest whenever Ethan Hale was near. 3 days passed, the rain stopped, the sun came out, and Martha threw herself into work. She tended her garden obsessively, mucked out the henhouse, organized the barn, anything to keep her hands busy and her mind occupied. On the fourth day, she heard hoofbeats again. But this time, it wasn't Ethan. Two men on horseback rode into her yard dressed in fine suits that looked out of place against the rough Wyoming landscape. The older one, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, dismounted with the easy confidence of someone used to being in charge. "Mrs. Cole?" he called out. Martha came out of the barn, immediately wary. "Who's asking?" "My name is Harrison Wells. I'm Ethan Hale's business manager." The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I wonder if we might have a word." Martha's stomach dropped. "What about?" "About your arrangement with Mr. Hale." Wells pulled a document from his jacket. "It's come to my attention that he's been spending considerable time on your homestead, working here, I'm told, living in your barn." "He's been helping with repairs," Martha said carefully. "Nothing improper about it." "Of course not." Wells's smile widened, turning predatory. "But you must understand how it looks. Ethan Hale, one of the wealthiest men in the territory, doing manual labor on a failing homestead owned by a destitute widow. People talk, Mrs. Cole. They wonder about motivations." "I don't care what people wonder." "Perhaps you should." Wells unfolded the document. "I'm authorized to make you an offer. Mr. Hale would like to purchase your homestead. He's offering 3 times its assessed value, $480. That's more than generous for 160 acres of scrubland." The words hit Martha like a slap. "He wants to buy my land?" "He does, and I advise you to accept. This is a very generous offer, Mrs. Cole. Far more than you'd get from anyone else." Martha's mind reeled. Ethan wanted her land. All this time, all those repairs, all those conversations, had it been about getting her to sell? About acquiring another piece of property for his empire? "Get off my land," she said, her voice shaking. "Mrs. Cole, please be reasonable." "I said, get off my land." Martha's voice rose. "Take your offer and tell Mr. Hale that my homestead is not for sale. Not now, not ever. And tell him if he wants something from me, he can damn well ask me himself instead of sending his business manager like I'm some kind of transaction to be closed." Wells's expression hardened. "You're making a mistake. This land will be worthless by next year, and then you'll have nothing." "Then I'll have nothing with my dignity intact." Martha crossed her arms. "Leave. Now." The two men exchanged glances, then remounted their horses. Wells looked down at her with something like pity. "Mr. Hale won't be pleased," he said. "I don't give a damn what Mr. Hale is pleased about." They rode away, and Martha stood in her yard, shaking with rage and betrayal and something that felt dangerously close to heartbreak. She was waiting when Ethan came back the next morning. Martha stood on her porch, arms crossed, jaw set, every line of her body radiating fury. She'd been up since before dawn, pacing her cabin, rehearsing what she'd say. The anger had burned through the night, fueled by betrayal and humiliation, and the terrible realization that she'd let herself hope for something that might have been a lie all along. She watched him ride up alone, no wagon, no Noah, just him on a dark horse. And she didn't move, didn't soften, didn't let the sight of him chip away at her anger the way part of her desperately wanted to. Ethan dismounted slowly, and she could see the moment he registered her expression. His face went carefully blank, the way it had been that first night in the storm when he was guarding himself against rejection. But this time there was something else there too. Fear, maybe. Or dread. "Martha, you want to buy my land," she cut him off. Her voice was cold, flat, each word precise as a knife blade. "Your business manager came yesterday with an offer, $480 for my homestead. Very generous," he said. "More than I'd ever get from anyone else." Ethan went absolutely still. For a long moment, he just stared at her, and Martha watched emotions flicker across his face too quickly to name. Shock. Confusion. Then understanding, followed immediately by something that looked like fury. "Wells came here?" His voice was quiet, dangerous. "He did, with papers all drawn up and ready for my signature. Told me what a good deal it was, how I should accept because this land would be worthless soon anyway. How people were talking about your arrangement with me, and this would solve everything." Martha's hands clenched at her sides, nails biting into her palms. "Was that the plan all along, Ethan? Get the poor widow to trust you, fix up her property to increase its value, make her dependent on you, then swoop in with an offer she'd be too grateful to refuse. No. The word came out sharp, almost violent. Ethan took a step forward, then stopped when he saw Martha stiffen. That wasn't... I didn't send Wells here. I didn't authorize any offer. I didn't even know he was planning this. He's your business manager. He is, and he makes decisions without consulting me more often than I'd like, especially when he thinks he's protecting my interests. Ethan's jaw was tight, a muscle jumping there. But Martha, I swear to you, I knew nothing about this. I would never, after everything we talked about, after what I told you about why I'm here, you have to know I wouldn't do that. I don't know what to believe anymore. Martha's voice cracked despite her best effort to keep it steady. You've lied to me before, about who you are, about what you have. You let me feed you my last food, give you my only bed, humiliate myself with my poverty, while you sat there knowing you could buy my entire homestead 100 times over and not even notice the expense. How do I know you're not lying now? How do I know this whole thing wasn't just another business acquisition to you? The words hit Ethan like physical blows. She could see it in the way he flinched, in the way his shoulders sagged, in the way all the careful control he usually maintained seemed to crack. You're right, he said quietly, and the defeat in his voice made Martha's chest ache despite her anger. I did lie. I deceived you about who I was, and I've given you every reason not to trust me. But Martha, I'm telling you the truth now. I don't want your land. I never wanted your land. I want... He stopped, dragged a hand through his hair. I want something that can't be bought, or acquired, or added to an empire. I want what we've been building here. I want you. How convenient. Martha's laugh was bitter. And when I refuse to sell, when I make things difficult, what then? Do you just take what you want anyway? You've got the money, the power, the connections. What's to stop you from going to the bank, buying up my debt again, and forcing me out? I would never do that. Ethan's voice rose, then dropped again, deliberate and controlled. I would never force you into anything. That's not who I am. Isn't it? Martha challenged. You paid my debt without asking. You made decisions about my life, my future, without giving me a choice. And now your business manager shows up trying to buy my land. Forgive me if I'm having trouble seeing the difference. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was raw. You want to know why Wells came here? I'll tell you, he's watched me for 2 years. Watched me work myself half to death trying to outrun grief. Watched me build and buy and expand like a man possessed, because that was easier than feeling anything. And then suddenly I stop. I start spending my days doing manual labor on a struggling homestead instead of running my empire. I'm happy for the first time in years, and he doesn't understand it. So he decided to fix the problem, Martha said flatly. He thought he was helping. Thought if he bought your place, gave you more than it's worth, you'd take the money and I'd come back to my senses. Back to business as usual. Ethan took a breath. He was wrong, and I'm going to make damn sure he knows it. And what about me? Martha's voice shook now, anger giving way to something more vulnerable. What am I supposed to do with this? How am I supposed to trust that you see me as anything other than another problem to solve, another acquisition to make? You're not a problem. You're not an acquisition. Ethan's voice was fierce now. You're the woman who saved my son's life when you had nothing to give. You're the strongest person I've ever met. You're someone who survived 3 years of hell and came out the other side still capable of kindness, still willing to help strangers in a storm. And somewhere along the way, you became the most important person in my world. The honesty of it made Martha's breath catch. She wanted to believe him, wanted it so badly it physically hurt. But she'd learned the hard way that wanting something didn't make it true. I can't do this right now, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I can't. I need time. I need to think. Then take time. Ethan didn't move closer, didn't try to touch her. Take all the time you need, but please let me do one thing first. What? Let me fire Wells. Let me go back to the ranch right now and make it clear that he had no authority to make that offer, that it's void, that if he ever makes a decision about my personal life again, he's done. Let me at least do that much. Martha studied his face, searching for deception and finding only desperate sincerity. Finally, she nodded. All right, do that. And then we'll see. Thank you. Ethan moved to his horse, then paused with his hand on the saddle. Martha, I know I've made mistakes. I know I've hurt you, but everything I told you about why I'm here, about what this place means to me, about what you mean to me, all of that was true. The only true thing in my life for a long time. He rode away before she could respond, and Martha stood on her porch watching him disappear over the ridge. When he was gone, she sank down onto the steps and put her head in her hands. She'd meant to send him away for good, meant to protect herself before she got hurt any worse. But she'd given him a chance instead, and she wasn't sure if that made her strong or foolish. The day stretched ahead of her, empty and heavy. Martha threw herself into work, attacking every chore with more force than necessary. She mucked out the henhouse, weeded the garden with aggressive thoroughness, scrubbed the cabin floor until her hands were raw. Anything to keep moving, to keep her mind from dwelling on dark eyes and calloused hands, and the way her heart had cracked when she'd thought it was all a lie. Evening came and went. Martha made herself supper but couldn't eat it. She sat at her table, the one Ethan had helped her repair, in the cabin he'd fixed, surrounded by evidence of his presence in her life, and tried to figure out what she wanted. She was still sitting there when she heard hoofbeats in the darkness. Her heart jumped and she moved to the window. Ethan was back, dismounting in the moonlight. He looked exhausted, like he'd aged 10 years since morning. Martha opened the door before he could knock. They stared at each other across the threshold, and she saw everything in his face. Weariness, hope, fear that she'd send him away. It's done, he said without preamble. Wells is fired. I should have done it months ago. Years ago, maybe. He'd gotten too used to making decisions without me, and I'd let him because I didn't care enough to stop him. But I care now. His voice dropped. I care so much it terrifies me. Come inside, Martha said. She wasn't ready to forgive, wasn't ready to forget, but she couldn't leave him standing in the dark either. Ethan stepped into the cabin, and Martha closed the door against the night. They stood in the lamplight, and she could see the toll the day had taken on him. The lines around his eyes were deeper, his shoulders were tense, and his hands were clenched at his sides like he was physically restraining himself from reaching for her. I told him everything, Ethan said. About that first night in the storm, about Noah being sick, about you saving his life, about how you gave us everything when you had nothing, about falling in love with you without meaning to, without planning it, about how this place, this falling apart cabin in the middle of nowhere, feels more like home than anywhere I've been in 2 years. Martha's throat tightened. You told him you love me? I told everyone. The whole ranch heard me shouting it while I fired Wells and explained exactly why he'd crossed a line he had no business crossing. Ethan's laugh was hollow. So much for discretion. By tomorrow the whole county will probably know. And you don't care? I don't care. He took a step closer. Let them know. Let them talk. I'm done hiding what matters. Done pretending this is just about work or charity or anything other than what it really is. And what is it really? Martha needed to hear him say it again, needed the words in the quiet of her cabin without anger or accusations between them. It's love, Ethan said simply. Messy and complicated and probably too fast, but it's love all the same. I love you, Martha. I love your strength and your stubbornness and the way you look at the world like you're daring it to knock you down one more time. I love the way you tend your garden and the way you talk to Noah and the way you've never once let me get away with anything. His voice cracked. And I'm terrified because I don't know how to do this without messing it up. I don't know how to love someone without trying to fix all their problems, without throwing money at things, without making decisions I think are helpful, but are really just taking away your choices. The honesty of it broke something open in Martha's chest. She'd been so focused on her anger, on feeling betrayed, that she hadn't considered what it cost him to be vulnerable like this. To admit his flaws and fears and ask for a chance anyway. I don't need you to fix my problems, she said quietly. I never did. I just needed you to see me, to respect me enough to ask before making decisions about my life. I know that now. I should have known it before. Ethan's hands opened and closed at his sides. I'm not good at this, Martha. At relationships, at partnership. Catherine used to tell me I was terrible at asking for help, at letting anyone else carry the weight. And she was right. I'm used to being the one who solves things, who makes things happen. But that doesn't work with you, does it? No, Martha agreed. It doesn't, because I'm not a problem to solve. I'm a person who's building a life. And if you want to be part of that life, you have to actually be part of it. Not hovering above it, throwing money and solutions down from on high. Beside it, beside me. I want that. Ethan's voice was fierce. I want to be beside you, not above you. Want to work with you, not for you. Want to build something together where we both have a voice, both make decisions, both matter equally. Martha looked at him, really looked, saw the man who'd shown up in a storm and had stayed through everything since. The man who'd lied and paid her debts and fixed her doors and planted flowers on her porch. The man who loved her son and worked until his hands bled and was trying, genuinely trying to be better than his instincts. I was so angry, she admitted. When Wells came here, when I realized what he was offering, I felt like everything we'd built was a lie. Like you'd been playing some long game and I was too stupid to see it. It wasn't a lie. None of it was a lie. Ethan took another step closer. The only lie was at the beginning when I didn't tell you who I was. Everything since then, every conversation, every moment, every feeling, has been the truest thing in my life. I want to believe that. Then believe it. He was close enough to touch now, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow. I'm not asking you to promise me forever. I'm just asking for a chance to prove that I can be the partner you deserve, that I can learn to ask instead of assume, that I can respect your choices even when I want to fix things. Martha felt the last of her anger drain away, leaving behind exhaustion and hope, and the terrifying realization that she'd already made her choice somewhere along the way. Maybe that first night when she'd opened her door to strangers. Maybe the first time Ethan had made her laugh. Maybe this morning when she'd given him a chance to explain instead of sending him away for good. I'm scared, she whispered. I'm scared of needing you, of building my life around you and then losing you the way I lost Thomas, of opening my heart again and having it broken. I'm scared too. Ethan's hand came up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her cheek. I'm terrified. Because I lost Catherine, and I know how much it destroys you to lose someone you love. But I'm more scared of not taking this chance, of walking away from you and spending the rest of my life wondering what we could have been. Martha closed her eyes and leaned into his touch. His hand was warm, calloused, steady, real. Stay, she said. Not in the barn. Stay here. With me. Ethan's breath caught. Martha. I'm not proposing anything improper, she clarified, opening her eyes. But I'm tired of you sleeping in the barn like you don't belong here. You can take the floor by the fire. I'll take the bed. But I want you here, in this space, because that's what partners do. They share space. They share lives. Are you sure? No. Martha's laugh was shaky. I'm not sure of anything except that I don't want you to leave, that I want to figure this out together instead of hiding from it. Is that enough? It's everything, Ethan said, and kissed her. It was their first real kiss, soft and tentative and carrying the weight of everything they'd survived to get to this moment. Martha's hands came up to grip his shoulders, and Ethan pulled her closer, careful and reverent, like she was something precious that might break. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he said again, and I'm going to spend every day proving I'm worthy of you. You don't have to prove anything, Martha replied. Just be here. Be honest. Be yourself. That's all I need. They stood there in the lamplight, holding each other, and Martha felt something settle in her chest. Peace, maybe. Or the beginning of it. The next weeks unfolded differently than before. Ethan still came every day to work, but now he stayed in the cabin at night, sleeping by the fire while Martha took the bed. It was proper enough to maintain respectability, but intimate in a way that went beyond physical proximity. They'd talk late into the evening, sharing dreams and fears and all the small thoughts that make up a life. Ethan told her about Catherine's death, About holding his wife's hand while she bled and there was nothing he could do to save her. About the daughter who'd never taken a breath. About the 2 years since then when he'd been more ghost than man, going through the motions of living without really being alive. Martha told him about Thomas, about the good man he'd been, and the plans they'd made, about watching him die under that horse and feeling her whole future disappear in an instant, about the 3 years of slowly starving, slowly giving up, until she'd been 1 week away from losing everything. "We're quite a pair," Ethan said one night. "Two people broken by loss, trying to figure out how to be whole again." "Maybe we don't have to be whole," Martha replied. "Maybe we just have to be honest about our broken pieces and see if they fit together anyway." "I like that." Ethan smiled in the firelight. "Broken pieces that fit together. That's us." Noah came to visit more frequently, staying for days at a time. He'd arrive bright-eyed and eager, ready to help in the garden or learn new skills from Martha. The boy had taken to calling her Mama Martha when he thought no one was listening, and each time he did, Martha's heart swelled with a fierce protective love she hadn't known she was capable of feeling. "He loves you," Ethan observed one evening after Noah had gone to bed in the loft. "Loves you the way he loved his mother. I see it in how he looks at you, how he seeks your approval, how he lights up when you praise him." "I love him too," Martha admitted. "He's become... I don't know how to explain it. It feels like he's mine somehow, even though I have no claim to him." "You have every claim to him." Ethan's voice was soft. "You saved his life. You've shown him kindness and patience and all the things he needed after losing his mother. If you want to be his mother now, in all the ways that matter, I'd be honored." The conversation hung in the air between them, weighted with implications and possibilities. Being Noah's mother meant being part of Ethan's family permanently, meant making a commitment that went beyond courtship or partnership, meant choosing forever. "I want that," Martha whispered. "I want to be his mother, want to be part of your family, want to build something permanent instead of just surviving day to day." "Then marry me," Ethan said. It wasn't a question this time, wasn't a formal proposal, just a statement of fact, of inevitability, of where they were both headed anyway. "Ask me properly," Martha said. "I want the words, want the moment, want something to remember." Ethan stood and pulled her to her feet. In the firelight, his face was open and honest and full of love. "Martha Cole," he said, taking both her hands in his, "I came to your door a broken man with a sick child, and you opened it without hesitation. You gave us shelter when you had none to spare. You gave us food when you were starving. You gave us kindness when the world had been cruel. And in doing so, you gave me back my life." Martha's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "I know I'm not easy," Ethan continued. "I know I make mistakes, and I try to fix things I should leave alone, and I have more money than sense sometimes. But I also know that I love you more than I thought possible, that I want to wake up beside you every morning and work beside you every day and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to give you everything you've ever dreamed of and build new dreams together. I want to raise Noah with you and maybe, if we're blessed, have more children. I want to spend the rest of my life proving that opening your door to me was the best decision you ever made." He knelt down on one knee, still holding her hands. "Will you marry me, Martha? Will you be my wife, Noah's mother, my partner in everything? Will you take a chance on building something beautiful from the broken pieces we both carry?" The tears spilled over, running down Martha's cheeks. "Yes," she said, her voice shaking. "Yes, I'll marry you. Yes to all of it." Ethan stood and swept her into his arms, kissing her with a joy that made them both laugh. When he set her down, he pulled a ring from his pocket, a simple gold band with a small diamond. "This was Catherine's," he said quietly. "If you don't want to wear it, if it's too much, I understand. I can get you a different one, but she would have wanted you to have it, I think. Would have been glad to know it was going to someone who would love Noah and take care of him." Martha looked at the ring, and instead of feeling jealous or compared, she felt honored. This wasn't about replacing Catherine. This was about honoring her memory while building something new. "I'd be proud to wear it," she said. "Thank you for trusting me with it." Ethan slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, like it had been meant for her all along. They stood there in the firelight, holding each other, And Martha understood that this was the beginning of something. Not an ending to their grief or their struggles, but a choice to face them together instead of alone. They set a date for October, when the leaves would turn and the harvest would be in. Martha wanted time to prepare, to make sure this was real and lasting and not just born from loneliness or desperation. Ethan agreed without argument, content to wait as long as she needed. The summer unfolded in warmth and growth. Martha's garden flourished, producing more vegetables than she'd ever managed before. Ethan brought in help to build a proper addition onto the cabin, a second bedroom for Noah, and eventually, other children. Martha insisted on being part of every decision, on approving every plan, and Ethan learned to ask instead of assume. They had their first real fight in late July. Ethan had ordered expensive furniture for the new room without consulting Martha first, thinking it would be a nice surprise. Instead, she'd been furious. "I don't want your money fixing everything," she'd shouted. "I want us to build this together with what we have, not with you just buying whatever you think we need." "I was trying to help," Ethan had shouted back. "I was trying to make things easier." "I don't need easier. I need equal. I need to be part of the decisions." They'd stood on opposite sides of the cabin, both breathing hard, both realizing this was a moment that mattered. Either they'd work through it or they'd fall apart. "You're right," Ethan had said finally. "I was wrong. I should have asked, should have included you. I'm sorry." "I know you were trying to help," Martha had replied, softening. "But Ethan, we have to be partners. Really partners. Not you taking care of me, but us taking care of each other." "I'm trying to learn that. It's harder than it should be." "I know, but you're trying. That's what matters." They'd worked it out, returned the furniture, and built simpler pieces together from lumber they could afford. The room was less grand than what Ethan had planned, but it was theirs, built with their hands, chosen together, a symbol of what they were becoming. In September, 1 month before the wedding, Ethan took Martha to his ranch. She'd been nervous about it, worried about seeing the full extent of his wealth, worried about feeling inadequate or out of place. But when they arrived at the sprawling property with its large house and numerous outbuildings, Ethan surprised her. "I'm selling it," he said as they stood looking at the house. "Most of it, anyway. I'll keep enough land for Noah to have his inheritance, but the rest, I don't need it. Don't want it, really. It was always about building something to fill the emptiness after Catherine died. But I'm not empty anymore." "Ethan, you can't sell your ranch because of me. I'm not doing it because of you. I'm doing it because of me. Because I've realized that having 12,000 acres doesn't make me happy. Working beside you, building a life that matters, that makes me happy. I'd rather have 160 acres with you than all the land in Wyoming without you." "What about Noah? What about his future?" "Noah will be fine. He'll have more than I ever did growing up, and he'll have something more valuable than land or money. He'll have 2 parents who love him and each other. He'll have a home built on partnership instead of grief. That's worth more than any empire." Martha looked at the house, at the symbol of everything Ethan had built, and understood what it cost him to let it go. "You're sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." They were married on a perfect October day, the sky a brilliant blue and the air crisp with the promise of coming winter. It was a small ceremony in Redemption Springs, attended by people who'd watched their story unfold and had come to believe in it. Mrs. Chen from the general store cried happy tears. The banker who'd once threatened foreclosure stood awkwardly in the back, looking vaguely ashamed. Several of Ethan's former employees came, loyal despite the changes he'd made. And Noah stood as Ethan's witness, beaming with pride in his new suit. Martha wore a simple dress of pale blue, nothing fancy, but Ethan looked at her like she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. When the preacher asked if anyone objected, the silence was profound. No one doubted this anymore. No one questioned whether the wealthy Ethan Hale and the once destitute Martha Cole belonged together. They'd proven they did. With every choice, every compromise, every moment of choosing partnership over pride. "I, Ethan Hale, take you, Martha Cole, to be my lawfully wedded wife," Ethan said, his voice steady and sure. "I promise to work beside you as an equal partner, to respect your strength and your choices, to never make decisions that affect our life together without your voice being heard. I promise to love you and Noah with everything I have, in good times and bad, for richer or poorer, in sickness and health, for as long as we both shall live." Martha's vows were equally heartfelt. "I, Martha Cole, take you, Ethan Hale, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to let you help me without seeing it as weakness, to trust in your love even when I'm scared, to build a life with you based on honesty and partnership. I promise to love you and Noah, to be the family we've all been searching for, through all the seasons of our lives, for as long as I live." When they were pronounced husband and wife, Noah cheered so loudly that the whole church laughed. Ethan kissed Martha thoroughly, properly, in front of everyone, and she kissed him back with all the love she'd been holding in her heart. They didn't go on a honeymoon. Instead, they went home, to the homestead that Martha had fought so hard to keep and that Ethan had helped rebuild. To the cabin with its new addition, its fixed doors and patched roof, its garden full of late-season vegetables, to the barn full of chickens and the future they'd build together. That first night as husband and wife, after Noah had gone to sleep in his new room, Martha and Ethan sat on the porch together watching the stars emerge one by one. "Are you happy?" Ethan asked, pulling Martha close against his side. She thought about the woman she'd been a year ago, alone, starving, 1 week from losing everything, so hollowed out by loneliness that she'd forgotten what joy felt like. She thought about how close she'd come to giving up entirely, to just letting the bank take the land and walking away from the life she'd tried to build. "Yes," she said simply. "I'm happier than I ever thought possible. Are you?" "More than I have words to express." Ethan pressed a kiss to her temple. "Thank you for taking a chance on a dust-covered stranger and his sick child. Thank you for opening your door when you had every reason to keep it closed. Thank you for being brave enough to love again." "Thank you for fixing my door," Martha said with a smile, "and my windows, and my life." "We fixed each other's lives," Ethan corrected gently. "That's what makes this work. That's what makes it real." They sat in comfortable silence as the night deepened around them. Inside, Noah stirred in his sleep, and Martha felt a fierce protective surge of love. Her son now, in all the ways that mattered. "I want to give him a brother or sister," Ethan said quietly, echoing her thoughts. "When you're ready, when we're ready. I want to give us a child together, to build our family bigger and stronger." Martha's hand found Ethan's and squeezed. "I'd like that too. Not right away, but someday, when the time is right." "We have all the time in the world," Ethan said. "We have the rest of our lives to build this family, this home, this life. There's no rush." But as it turned out, life had its own timeline. 3 months later in January, Martha realized she was pregnant. The morning sickness started first, then the exhaustion, then the undeniable evidence that a child was growing inside her. She was both terrified and overjoyed, remembering her 3 years with Thomas when no child had come, wondering if this was a second chance or a cruel trick. She told Ethan on a cold winter evening, watching his face carefully for his reaction. Would he be happy? Scared? Would the memories of losing Catherine and their daughter make this unbearable? "I'm pregnant," she said simply, and waited. Ethan went very still. For a long moment, he didn't speak, didn't move. Then his eyes filled with tears, and he pulled Martha into his arms with a gentleness that made her own eyes water. "Are you sure?" he whispered against her hair. "As sure as I can be. About 10 weeks along, I think. And how do you feel? Are you healthy? Do you need to see a doctor?" "I feel fine, tired, a little sick in the mornings, but fine, strong." Martha pulled back to look at him. "Are you all right with this?" "I know it must bring up memories. I'm terrified," Ethan admitted. "I won't lie about that. The thought of going through that again, of losing you the way I lost Catherine, it scares me more than anything. But I'm also so happy I can barely breathe. We're going to have a baby, Martha. Our baby. We're going to be a family." "We already are a family," Martha said. "You, me, and Noah. We've been a family since the day we chose each other." "You're right. But this feels like proof. Like the universe saying we deserve this, deserve another chance at happiness and life and all the good things we thought we'd lost." They held each other in the lamplight. Two people who'd been broken by loss and were choosing to be brave enough to hope again. The pregnancy was high risk, they both knew. Martha was in her late 20s but had never carried a child to term. Ethan's memories of Catherine's death hung heavy between them, but they faced it together, as partners, making every decision jointly. They found the best doctor in the territory. They prepared carefully, practically, and they let themselves hope, cautiously at first, then with growing confidence as the months passed and Martha stayed healthy and strong. Noah was beside himself with excitement. "I'm going to be a big brother," he announced to anyone who would listen. "I'm going to teach the baby everything I know." Spring came, and with it, new growth. The garden was planted again, larger this time. The chickens laid prolifically. The homestead that had once been falling apart now stood strong and well-maintained, a testament to what could be built when two people worked together. Martha's belly grew round and full. Ethan hovered constantly, driving her half mad with his protectiveness, but also making her feel cherished and safe. They prepared the second bedroom for the baby, building a crib together from wood Ethan had carefully selected and Martha had approved. "I want to name her Hope," Martha said one evening in late summer as they worked on the crib. "If it's a girl, because that's what she represents. Hope that we can have good things again. Hope that loss doesn't have to be the end of everything." "And if it's a boy?" Ethan asked, running his hand over the smooth wood. "Thomas," Martha said quietly, "after my first husband. Not to replace him or pretend he didn't matter, but to honor him. To remember that the life I had with him led me to the life I have with you." Ethan looked at her with such love that Martha's breath caught. Hope or Thomas, either way, this child will know they're loved beyond measure. The baby came in September, 1 year after Martha and Ethan's wedding. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Ethan's fear became palpable, when he paced the cabin with white-knuckled hands and couldn't hide his terror. But Martha was strong, stronger than anyone had given her credit for, and when the baby finally came into the world with a healthy cry, the relief was overwhelming. "A girl," the doctor announced, placing the tiny bundle in Martha's arms. "A perfectly healthy baby girl." Ethan knelt beside the bed, tears streaming down his face as he looked at his wife and daughter. Noah crowded close, peering at his new sister with wonder. "Hope," Martha said, smiling through her own tears. "Hope hail. Welcome to the world, little one." The baby had Martha's eyes and Ethan's dark hair, and she was perfect. Absolutely perfect. As they sat together, Ethan, Martha, Noah, and baby Hope, Martha understood that this was what healing looked like. Not forgetting the past or pretending it didn't hurt, but building something new from the broken pieces. Creating beauty from loss. Choosing love over fear. 2 years passed in a blur of growth and change and joy. Hope grew from a baby to a toddler, curious and fearless, and completely adored by her older brother. Noah, now 10, took his role as big brother seriously, teaching Hope everything he knew about the garden and the chickens and the wide Wyoming world around them. The homestead flourished. The garden produced bountifully. Ethan had sold most of his ranch as promised, keeping just enough land to ensure Noah's future while simplifying his life to what truly mattered. He worked alongside Martha every day, finding more satisfaction in honest labor than he'd ever found in building his empire. They had arguments sometimes, moments when old patterns threatened to resurface, times when Ethan tried to fix things without asking, or when Martha's pride made her push away help she needed, but they'd learned to talk through it, to compromise, to remember that partnership meant working together instead of alone. And they built more than just a homestead. They built a family, a real family, chosen and cherished and fought for every single day. On their second anniversary, Martha and Ethan stood on their porch at sunset, watching Noah and Hope play in the yard. The cabin behind them was warm and welcoming, full of the sounds of life and laughter. The land around them was productive and well-tended, a testament to years of hard work and careful planning. "Do you ever regret it?" Martha asked quietly. "Giving up your empire? Choosing this life instead of the one you had?" Ethan pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. "Not for a single second. That life was about running from grief. This life is about running toward joy. There's no comparison." "Even when the chickens escape and we spend half the day chasing them?" Martha teased. "Even then," Ethan laughed. "Especially then, maybe. Because we're chasing them together, and afterward we'll laugh about it over supper and hope we'll demand to hear the story 3 times before bed. That's what makes life worth living. Not money or land or power, just love and family and ordinary moments that become extraordinary because we're sharing them. Martha leaned into him, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. She thought about the desperate widow she'd been, starving and alone, 1 week from losing everything. She thought about the dust-covered stranger who'd knocked on her door in a storm and how opening that door had changed everything. "I love you," she said. "I love this life we've built. I love our children and our home and every ordinary, extraordinary moment we share." "I love you too," Ethan replied. "More than I thought possible. More than I have words to say." In the yard, Noah caught Hope and swung her around, both of them laughing with pure, uncomplicated joy. And Martha Cole Hale, standing on her porch with her husband's arm around her, understood that sometimes the best things in life come from the moments when you choose kindness over fear, when you open your door to strangers in a storm, when you let yourself hope even when you're terrified. She'd given Ethan and Noah shelter for 1 night, never knowing that the dust-covered cowboy owned half the county, never knowing that her simple act of compassion would change all their lives forever. But that was the thing about kindness. You never knew where it would lead. You just had to be brave enough to offer it, to open the door when someone knocked, to believe that broken pieces could fit together into something beautiful and whole. And as the sun set over the Wyoming prairie, painting everything in gold, Martha knew with absolute certainty that she'd been brave enough, that they all had, that what they'd built together, this family, this home, this life, was worth every moment of fear and doubt and struggle it had taken to get here. The homestead that had almost been lost now stood as a testament to survival, to partnership, to the transformative power of choosing love over loneliness. And in the years to come, it would continue to stand, would continue to grow, sheltering not just one woman fighting to survive, but a family that had chosen each other and had built something lasting from the wreckage of their pasts. That night, after the children were asleep and the cabin was quiet, Martha and Ethan sat together by the fire. No words were needed. They simply held hands and watched the flames dance, 2 people who'd found each other in the darkest of nights and had built toward the brightest of futures. Outside, the Wyoming wind whispered through the prairie grass. The stars emerged one by one in the vast sky. And in a small cabin on a once struggling homestead, a family slept peacefully, safe in the knowledge that they were loved, they were home, and they were exactly where they belonged. The end of one story, the continuation of another, the eternal cycle of loss and love, of endings and beginnings, of broken things made whole again. And it all started with a simple choice to open a door to strangers in a storm.